It was my third year of Catholic high school, class of ethics, debating about the voluntary interruption of pregnancy, which went exactly as you're thinking. Mr. Hardy, the professor, somehow ended his argument by saying that the existence of God could be proven. And then the bell rang. I got curious but didn't care to pursue the matter any further because Mr. Hardy only proved to be an indoctrinating piece of shit, who later actually went on to fail everybody at the end of the semester who had disagreed with him that day. Now I think to have found out what he meant. But first, wouldn't it be easier to prove the opposite? That the big man that lives in the clouds doesn't exist? Well, to prove something exists is easier than the opposite, by virtue of needing not more than a concrete piece of evidence to satisfy the burden of proof. Proving something doesn't exist is irrational. It will require me finding proof of inexistence under every possible scenario and circumstance. It's an impossibly asymmetrical effort. Then I'll do away with the big man that lives in the clouds, the anthropomorphic mythological entity, and refer to God as a concept, the ultimate, almighty creative force of the universe. Now prepare for your brain to be salad tossed. Of course, I wouldn't be able to do this alone. That is why I must summon Saint Anselm of Canterbury, a clergyman that didn't take faith as an excuse to not use reason. During the 11th century, he wrote 2 books to reason the existence of God, the Monologion and the Proslogion. The Monologion offers 3 arguments in favor of the existence of God. First, the degrees of perfection. Things can be closer or farther in their essence to an absolute perfection. Something is more or less beautiful, good, or just in relation to the idea of perfect beauty, goodness, or justice we have. Saint Thomas Aquinas explains that degrees of a certain perfection, beauty, goodness, and justice, are by themselves absolute, but limited by existing within a subject, finite in its condition. Saint Anselm adds that there are no individual perfections of different levels, but one single absolute and ideal perfection that exists at the highest level, above which nothing else exists. That plane of existence, wherein all perfections cohabit, we can call God. Second, the being of things. According to reason, being, both as a noun and a verb, comes from either another being or from nothing. But from nothing, nothing comes. So either A, beings in their origin come from one supreme being. B, they existed as many from the beginning, or C, they created one another. In A, this one supreme being is cause of the other's existence. In B, by existing as many, beings, the noun, share at least the condition of being, the verb, which can be traced back by degrees of perfection to the perfect being, God. In C, we find an absurd. The act of being cannot be given and received at the same time. A master and a slave owe to each other their condition, but not their being, since they already were before receiving their condition. And third argument, if degrees can reach perfection at all, or get lost in infinity. When we talk about a perfect being, there are 2 possibilities. 1, there's an infinite series of beings, so we cannot reach one so perfect that it doesn't admit any betterment. Or 2, there's a finite series of beings, at the end of which is the perfect being. 2 leads to the existence of God. 1 leads to infinity, a realm only God can occupy. Every argument in the Monologion goes back to a single cause. Anselm's second book, the Proslogion, deals with one central argument. God is that which nothing greater than can be thought. God, according to Anselm, is the ultimate being, and nothing greater than the concept of him can be thought. This argument, it must be said, presupposes that thinking equals existing, but more on that later. So thinking about the concept of God makes it, if nothing else, real in our thoughts. But if something had all the features of the concept of God that we have in our mind, plus existence in reality, then it will be greater than God, and that will be illogical. It's mandatory that he exists, not only in thought, but in reality too. For if he existed only in one or the other, he wouldn't be God. And if I thought there was something greater than God, even nothing itself, I will be saying God is not that which nothing greater than can be thought. I will be saying God is not God. It was all a nicely wrapped argument by Anselm, until one Gonilo of Mormetier came along. A contemporary monk from an abbey in France thought he could fight Anselm's argument by taking the position of the so-called fool that says God doesn't exist. Gonilo's main argument was that thinking doesn't equal existing. That and a couple other bones he had to pick with Anselm. Like, what if I thought of something false? If I listened to a false thing and understood it, and had it now in my thoughts, in my understanding, would that make it a reality? Anselm answered in a third book that false things, by their condition of falseness, can only exist in thought, but not in reality. What about ignorance then? What if I say the word God to someone that doesn't even know what I'm talking about?
Huh?
It's not in that person's understanding, so it doesn't exist. Well, for Anselm, doubting about the existence of a thing requires understanding about that thing. For that person to doubt about the existence of God, I will have to explain to that person what God is. Golino then states that if God was indeed a supreme being, then no one could doubt its existence. If one could doubt it, then it's because God is not the supreme being. For Anselm, it's possible to doubt the concept of God, but not the reality of its existence, because anyone can think of a minor good, goodness, beauty, intelligence, and in relation to that minor good, think about a greater good, and in relation to that, think about a greater good with no end, and in relation to that, think about a greater good with no end nor beginning, and in relation to that, think about a greater good with no end nor beginning in its absolute form. Again, if one thinks God doesn't exist, one is not thinking about God, for by virtue of its supremeness, nothing greater than God can be thought. One problem of the argument lays in thinking being equal to existing. Philosophers on the side of Plato would agree, Anselm himself, Leibniz, Descartes, Hegel. Philosophers on Aristotle's side of the street will not. Gonilo himself, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Locke, Kant. For the first group, the a priori argument constitutes the victory of pure and self-sufficient thought. For the second, is nothing more than intellectual circle-jerking, a mere exercise of reason divorced from the reality of the world. The other problem lays in Anselm's argument, starting from faith preceding reason, even writing, "And I do not seek to understand that I might believe, but believe that I might understand. For this too I believe, since unless I first believe, I shall not understand." So I imagine this is what Mr. Hardy would have explained had the class not ended. Interesting as it might be, though, I don't find it's enough to prove the existence of God. I must take a step beyond St. Anselm and Mr. Hardy and add empirical proof to the matter. There are constants in the universe, that which Stephen Hawking called fundamental numbers, the level of entropy at the Big Bang, the gravitational and weak force constants, the chemical components that allowed life on Earth to thrive, the amount of strong force required to keep the nucleus together in an atom, levels and quantities perfectly tuned for the universe we live in to exist. Just as an example, if changes in the strength of gravity or the weak force, even as minimal as less than 1 part in 10 to the 50, would have occurred by the Big Bang, the universe would have either blown up in an instant or would have disintegrated back into nothingness after expanding. This some call intelligent design, the notion that reality is too complicated to not have been designed by a supreme being. A controversial term wielded by people of faith that has been deemed as rebranded creationism. If these constants are proof, what are they proof of? If we keep going back, using Anselm's argument, we reach the hand of the designer, a creator outside time and space, setting the initial constitution that allowed the universe to exist after the first spark, which could also be attributed to a civilization advanced enough that is capable of molding a universe at will, or to mere chance, a universe with as low a level of entropy to exist and harbor life as ours, according to the calculations by Nobel Prize laureate Roger Penrose, had 1 chance in 10 to the 10 to the 123 of existing. Almost a miracle. But at what point do miracle and chance blend into each other? It's proof, tied by a fine thread that leads to the mist that hides all that which we do not know. What I'd call a wrestling concept. A conceptual level of such elusiveness that we should all be comfortable to struggle with. And the argument goes on.